Hello and welcome back to Diddy on Trial from the BBC World Service with me, Anoushka Mutanda-Dougherty. You know the drill. Subscribe to the World Service YouTube channel so you never miss a thing. Sean Diddy Combs, aka Puff Daddy, aka P. Diddy or Brother Love, take your pick, is awaiting trial in a New York jail on charges of sex trafficking, transportation for prostitution, and racketeering with conspiracy. He denies all the allegations. Today, we're bringing you an exclusive from the BBC's investigations team. They've been speaking to industry insiders from the 1990s who knew him during his meteoric rise. They say they recall a culture of big money, threats of violence, and sex in the studios of his Bad Boy record label.
If you're in the studio and you record it, this is gonna sound horrible, but you pay for a flight for a woman to come into the studio is the same as like ordering food to the studio.
Sean Combs' legal team have denied all the allegations. Rianna Croxford, the BBC's investigations correspondent, is with me today. Hi, Rianna.
Hi.
Well, first of all, when did you start investigating Diddy?
So I've been following the story since November 2023, when we all saw those headlines about Cassie Ventura. And then it wasn't really until he was arrested in September when my colleague and I started saying, should we do something about this? And one of the questions we had was, were there potential signs about his alleged conduct all the way back in the 90s when he first started his career? So that's really one of the threads that we pulled out over the last few months.
And why specifically focusing on the 90s?
So there have been so many allegations against Sean Combs. And more than a dozen of those claims do date back to the 90s. In that era, we really see the creation and invention of Sean Combs, who back then was known as Puff Daddy. We see him at the start of the decade go from this up-and-coming rising star at Uptown Records, and by the end of it, he's running his own Grammy award-winning music label, bringing in millions and millions of dollars. We also start to see the development of many of his personas. At the beginning of the 90s, he's this brash and bold music promoter. And by the end, he's got this reputation as a party king, throwing these massive celebrity bashes at New York nightclubs, on the beaches of Cancun, Mexico, but also in the Hamptons, his infamous all-white parties. It's also a decade where he has quite a few highs and lows. The label's really successful. It's having all of these number one hits on the Billboard charts, but he's also dealing with losses like the death of his friend, Biggie Smalls, who was the biggest star at the label back in the 90s. So there are lots of these challenges, and it really is quite a career and character defining era.
Yeah, because he gets this kind of reputation for being the good time guy. He's slick, he's well-dressed, he's got money, and the business side of it is working really well. The music side of it, he's established himself as sort of a picker of stars. You mentioned Biggie Smalls there, and you focused in on this particular period of his life. What did you find?
So we heard a lot about the makings of Diddy and how he changed, namely how money and power changed him. But we also spoke with a lot of insiders who worked at Bad Boy Records at the very beginning. And a lot of them described a culture back then of violent threats, of sex, and also of impunity. I had an exclusive interview with this man called Daniel Evans. Now, he was one of only a handful of original employees at Bad Boy Records in the early 90s. He was very much the money man. So he worked at the company from 1994 to 1997. And basically his role was to manage business contracts, budgets, and general expenditure.
I would say young energy. Lots of young energy, lots of young people, lots of great ideas, lots of excitement because a new label, new music. The gangster rap was all over the place for a while. People wanted to party, have fun, hook up, do things with each other, and, after work, build good memories. And so that's what Bad Boy represented. Being authentic and just being yourself without a filter, and just have fun. Like I said, we were all really young. I mean, I was 24 years old. But we had interns, from college, high school, You know, they would come in after work, they work in the mailroom, you know, they work in different departments.
I know you described at the beginning a sort of like hookup culture. Was that also happening with interns?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yes. Yes, there's a lot. Yeah. I mean, we had a lot of attractive interns in the office, and you had a lot of us working there. And, you know, like I said, I mean, I didn't see anything personally, but, you know, the water cooler stuff, you hear the stories. So, you know, that those things happen. And I don't think that's just Bad Boy. I think it happens across the industry in general.
Yeah, how common do you think it was back then for things like this to go on?
I think it was very common. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it was uncommon to have, I mean, even when we were doing videos, you would invite, you know, young women to the videos, to be in the videos, to have the youthful party, you know, vibe that you're looking for. I mean, Bad Boy was about having a party. It was about being young, having fun, you know, that's what it was about.
So we're hearing there about the workplace culture at Bad Boy, which Bad Boy really is what's imbued him with the credibility of being like one of the greats. I think a lot of music critics would say he's not lyrically the best rapper out there. I think that's a fair thing to say. He'd probably say that himself. But he had this sort of reputation for establishing legacy. But you've just told us about a workplace that has potentially inappropriate working relationships between interns and people in positions of power. What did Daniel tell you about how women were treated specifically at Bad Boy? Daniel talked a lot about how there are actually quite a number of women at this label back in the 90s. And he said it wasn't uncommon for people to be hooking up with women. And he himself said that he walked in on his boss, Sean Diddy Combs, back in the early 90s, with a young woman in the recording studio.
Back then, you don't see them as warning signs. You see it as, this is what people do, you know, in this business, right? But I remember my first week working at Bad Boy as a paid employee. I was at the studio, and Puffy was there. And there was a girl there. They had met or whatever. I didn't think anything of it. My work was done. I was getting ready to go home for the night. I was going to get my jacket. And I just opened the door. And he's in there, you know, having sex with this girl. I don't know how old she was. But was that a sign? At the time, I didn't think so. At the time, I thought I was getting fired. Because I just walked in on my boss, you know, having sex with this girl. She was young, so, you know. So to see them in the room, you know, it's kind of like, oh, you know, yeah.
Did those sorts of encounters happen often?
Yeah, that was the only one that I have seen, but yeah, they happen a lot in the studio. A lot of things happen in the studios after a certain time.
And you said that this young woman seemed quite quiet. Did that change at all, or was she still quite quiet in the moment?
You know what? She was so quiet. Yeah.
Did that seem unusual?
You know what? At the time, no. It didn't. But then again, you know, knowing what I know now, you know, there's a lot of speculation about what state she was in. You know, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, usually both parties are very responsive during the act, so it's possible. It's possible.
And so you're saying that she was quite quiet when she arrived, but when you walked in on them, she also still seemed quite quiet then?
Yes.
And what do you mean by that, just so I'm clear?
Well, if two people are having sex, you know, you hear a lot of noise. I didn't hear any noise. I thought the room was empty. So when I walk in, I'm surprised to see.
And how do you feel looking back on it now in light of some of the allegations that we've been hearing about?
I mean, I still think it's a big leap to go from what happened that day to what's happening right now in the headlines. And again, I haven't spoken to him in 22 years, so I don't know, you know, how he's evolved per se. But I don't know. I guess I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, with all that money and everything that he's had over the years, you know, money does things to you.
And it wasn't just walking in on people.
Right. So Daniel also says, as part of his job, and he knows this because he was the finance man, other artists and executives at the label would request for women across the states to be flown into the studio for sex.
And it wasn't uncommon to fly women in from around the country. Well, not around the country, but they could be like a 2 or 3 hour flight away type of thing, to have sex with people in the studio.
So it wasn't uncommon to fly women in to have sex in the studio?
Mm-hmm.
Did that happen on more than one occasion?
A couple. Usually they had a specialty in a certain sexual, you know, if they had a specialty in something, yeah, they would be flown in.
And you would be asked to do that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Why were they asking you?
Well, to book a flight?
Because you were the finance man?
Yeah, and it's coming out of the budget. So if you're the studio and you're recording, this is going to sound horrible, but you know, you pay for a flight for a woman to come into the studio is the same as like ordering food to the studio.
Because
It's
the label was
like,
making so much money back then.
Yeah, it's just, yeah.
I mean, how much money do you think like was spent on these flights, on bringing people in?
Oh, to be honest with you, I mean, probably like thousands of dollars.
I mean, what would you even expense it under? Like, how
Travel.
would you find under travel?
Yeah.
So there was this broader corporate culture where it wasn't unusual for employees to be asking for women to be flown to New York for sex. And that was really striking. That's something that we haven't heard to date. I think it raises a lot of questions about how that company was being run, and the sort of standards in place and the culture around that. He described some of the things that he said had troubled him back during his time at the company. So he talked, for instance, about this hookup culture with interns and said he'd had his own uncomfortable experience when he says he was propositioned by a 14-year-old at the company. He said he was sort of taken aback. They had been working late at night, and she sort of turned to him and said, "Do you want to kind of let loose and kick it after work?" And yeah, he said he was totally taken aback. He was 24 at the time. She then told him that she was 14. And he said he basically told her to go home, to not come back to work. But 2 weeks later, she was back working in the mailroom.
He really was there pretty much since the foundation of the company, right? Because is it 93 it started and he was there 94?
Yeah, exactly.
We're hearing there about a hookup culture with interns, but not specifically Diddy and interns. It was a general culture.
It was a general culture. I haven't heard any specific allegations about Diddy hanging out with interns in that way, but a number of staff have said and confirmed that there was a hookup culture there more broadly, and they said they were all sort of young 20-somethings, and nobody was asking about ages back then.
But he does talk to you specifically about Diddy and the changes he may have gone through. Now, his life changed massively during this period. How does he say that the money, the fame, the label success changed him?
Absolutely. I mean, think back to the 90s. At the beginning, Diddy was an intern at another record label. 2 years later, after he gets fired from Uptown Records, he starts Bad Boy and becomes an overnight millionaire. And that's in 1993. Now, Daniel Evans describes an incident just 3 years later in 1997 when he says, Diddy is getting really annoyed at an employee in the bad boy offices in New York.
Puffy, even to this day, is the hardest working man that I've ever met. And it was very tiring for me to see him work so hard, you know. And he always wanted people to match his energy, which is frustrating because he could come off a little prickly about it, you know. But it's his company, so of course he's going to work hard to build it into something.
How do you feel that sudden rise and all of the money that was coming in, did it have an impact on Puffy, on Sean as a person? Do you feel like he changed during that time, like over the first few years of the company?
Yeah, he did change, and you know, it's not surprising. I mean, you know, the label started off very small. They recorded "Ready to Die," I think in his grandmother's basement or something like that. And then that became a multi-platinum hit. We had a lot of multi-platinum hits during that time. And Puffy just renewed his deal with Arista. He got a big payout. As the weeks went on, you know, we saw a different side. He liked to threaten people.
What would he say?
I mean, there was one time where, I don't know what, I have no idea what happened, but somebody messed up something. And he says to him, you know, if you do this again, you know, I could hire somebody to get rid of you and they wouldn't even know where to find you. What a weird thing to say to somebody. You know, and at the same time, it was like, this is what money does to you, you know? It's like you know everything, you know everybody, and you think that you can just do anything.
Do you feel like anyone in the office believed that he might be capable of that?
Anything's possible.
Really, anything's possible?
Well, why not? I mean, you know, like I said, I mean, hip hop is street culture. It's not just a good festive party culture, but there's also a dark side as well, streets. And, you know, there are a lot of grimy people out there who will do whatever for money. And that was always the case. Even before he got the money. So that was always the case.
So I think that's going to be quite striking to a lot of people, because when you think of Bad Boy, the way it was then packaged afterwards was, this is the family. I mean, he referred to it as the family. And when Biggie died, that was how a lot of it was marketed. But you've told us there women were being compared, he compared it to ordering a takeaway, flying women from around the States, and that coming from a corporate budget.
Yeah, so Daniel isn't the only former staffer to tell me that they walked in on Sean Combs having sex. So I've also spoken with a woman called Felicia Newsom. She was the studio manager of Daddy's House, Bad Boy's recording studio, back in the 90s. She opened the studio and ran it for 6 years. And she told me about an incident where she was called by a studio worker in the middle of the night who was complaining that Sean Combs was in his underwear in the mailroom asking them to get him condoms because he was just about to have sex with a model and another woman. And this staffer was feeling really uncomfortable. So Felicia says she gets this phone call. She goes straight to the recording studio. Diddy is still there, only this time he's a little bit more dressed up. And she basically has a go at him. She's like, don't you ever ask any of my employees at this studio to get you condoms again. And Felicia, for context, is a little bit older than the others. She's in her 30s. At the time, Diddy's in his 20s. And she says he kind of responds quite humbly, being like, I'm sorry, Ma, you know, I'll never do it again. And she said that he never did do it again. But what I found quite interesting speaking with Felicia was that she sort of came across as quite a strong female influence. You know, she kind of called Diddy out on some of his behaviour, and she talked, for instance, about when the studio was first opening in 1995. Diddy was really uncomfortable and hated the way that the countertops looked. So he basically starts insulting her and like berating her in front of all of the studio workers because he's really upset about the look of these countertops. And Felicia gets so annoyed that she demands a public apology from Diddy, and also temporarily shuts down the studio. She's like, you know what, if you're going to disrespect me, I'm going to lock up this studio until I get an apology. And Diddy does apologize and doesn't do it again. So she talked about how he could be reasonable if you pushed back and challenged his behavior. But she described as a comparison that Bad Boy Records was like a crazy house, and that a lot of the newer employees who came in, many of them didn't want to challenge Diddy or push back at him because at that point he was so successful. He was a multi-millionaire and the label really was reaching new heights. So at the early days, it seems like people did try and push back and challenge this conduct, but as time went on, there was less of that.
I feel like a lot of people might say, particularly people who were around during that generation of music, you're coming off the back of gangster rap, and then you've got kind of hip hop culture that's luxurious, it's fast cars, nice suits, and they might hear, you know, Diddy wandering around in his underpants in the mail room. Well, that's what it was. That's how it is. That's the rap star lifestyle. But you've just told us from Daniel, I mean, in Daniel's own words, there were people within the working environment who were 14, 15 years old in the mailroom. They were around. They might not have been in there at that specific time, but in the workplace, there were very, very young people where this was happening.
Yeah, exposing young people to that kind of culture. And you're right, you know, I have spoken with people who, you know, I've put some of these claims to them and they've said, Sex in the Studio, well, that was a dream state, a goal state for many people in the industry. I mean, why would you not do that? Why would you not enjoy all the trappings of being a high net worth celebrity? People want to hang out with you. You know, they talked about there being lots of groupies back in the day around that as well. But I think in the view of some people, it does cross the line when you're bringing other employees into that atmosphere.
The picture that we get from this investigation from the people you've spoken to is that this thing that's the establishment of his legacy was actually a really, at times, inappropriate space, and a space that made people feel uncomfortable. And a lot of people will ask, well, why didn't you speak out then? Why didn't you say, I'm not comfortable working here? Why didn't you leave? Did you put those questions to people?
Well, I think for some people, it was like, as you said earlier, this is just what happens. You know, he's really rich. I heard, for instance, you know, it wasn't unusual, according to a former assistant of Sean Combs, for him to request for women to be flown in to meet with him as well. So if he was traveling and out and about, you know, his assistants would be asked, you know, can you fly in this woman who I'm, quote, messing around with and put her up in this hotel so that I can see her? People just saw that as part of the lifestyle.
Yeah, and I suppose we're really only beginning to have meaningful conversations about music industry, workplace culture now. I mean, throughout this entire thing, people have been questioning whether you should have 3 a.m. studio sessions, whether you should, you know, go from the club straight to your place of work. So in the 90s, I mean, if we're having those conversations now, they probably weren't present there at all. But you spoke to Daniel while you were in New York, because you went out there to investigate it, and he gives a picture of what it was like at the time. Was it easy to get him to open up to you? What was the process like?
No, I mean, my colleague and I have contacted more than 350 people as part of this investigation. Some people were open to talking. You know, a lot of people are still fearful about speaking out against someone like Sean Combs, but also just more broadly worried about tarnishing the legacy of the label, especially people who got their starts there. But, you know, I've met with Daniel quite a few times. I was out in New York for quite some time working on a different project. So, you know, we would meet up a few times and sort of talk about his experiences. And after some time, yeah, he did feel comfortable kind of going on camera and sharing his own story and his own experience about being at the label.
This investigation has painted a picture of Bad Boy that Diddy didn't paint himself. So you've put these allegations to his team. What have they said?
That's right. We wrote to his legal team and they've given us this statement saying that the BBC has failed to provide them with any substantive details about these accusations. And they say that these allegations lack context and credibility. They said it was impossible for Mr. Combs to present any facts and counter what they described as fabricated accusations, saying that this story is clearly designed to push a one-sided, prejudicial narrative. They also said that Mr. Combs cannot dignify every publicity stunt or absurd claim with a response, and they said he has full confidence in the judicial process where the truth will prevail. saying that these accusations are pure fiction.
When you do an investigation like this and you're making allegations about a person, because he's a person and he deserves to be treated fairly, whatever, the court of public opinion may have decided, this is still an innocent man. The only thing we know he's done is assault Cassie in the hallway of that hotel. When you are conducting your investigation, you do not just speak to one person and say, oh, they told me this, off I go. The process it's far more in depth than that.
Absolutely. And we also don't go in with an agenda. What I want to do is speak to as many people as possible, hear as many different views as possible. And sometimes you find it that people who, as I found as well, people who really are in support of Diddy, they still don't want to speak out in favour of him, no matter what. So it's been really hard getting people to speak. We've contacted more than 350 people. We've spoken to about 20 to 30 people about their experiences, and we asked really open questions. And of course, you ask people what they make of the allegations, and people have lots of different responses to that. So, everything that we do has to be fact-checked, has to be corroborated. So while Daniel Evans, Felicia Newsom, and others are on the record about their experiences, there are plenty of people we've spoken to behind the scenes. We've put these claims to get their view on what was going on, and we have had these claims corroborated.
You've been speaking to Tony Busby. Now, if you remember, this is the Texan lawyer who claimed to have more than 150 cases against Sean Combs that he's going to file. Now, he's kind of picking up pace again. What's going on there?
That's right. He says he's got about 10 new lawsuits that he's going to be filing in the coming days.
This happened at studios, that this happened at hotels, that this happened at bars, that this happened backstage. And of course, we're still sifting through all of that. We intend to file multiple more cases in the next 2 weeks.
Well, Sean Combs, his legal team sent this statement overnight. As they said they can't respond to every new claim, but they have full confidence in the facts and the integrity of the judicial process. So in court, they said the truth will prevail, that Mr. Combs never sexually assaulted or trafficked anyone, man or woman, adult or minor. I think something else to pick up on, just we have spoken to people who, really do love Sean Combs. I've spoken with some of his close friends who worked with him at the label back in the 90s. Someone like Jeffrey Walker, who was a producer for the original production team, making beats with Diddy. And, he says many people in Diddy's inner circle are totally shocked by these allegations, that they've never witnessed any misconduct, that they've been to studio sessions, that they've never seen anything like this going on. So there are a lot of people who are devastated by what's happened. I think that's also because he's such a cultural icon, especially also in the Black community. And just in general, Bad Boy Records over the past 30 years, and Bad Boy Entertainment, it had dozens of interns. Like we're talking like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of interns. And a lot of people I've spoken with more broadly are just devastated that they're now scrubbing their CVs. They can't mention that they worked at this company or that they worked for him. And for a lot of people who got their start there, that's been quite devastating, seeing this legacy, the legacy of this label, be tarnished and sort of crumble along with Diddy's own reputation.
Yeah, and I imagine the other artists as well. I mean, the connection there with other people that he found, discovered. But he is still innocent. He is still innocent. And I think it's really important that you've brought up that there are other people out there who completely see him as a man worthy of legendary status, a man who was a great rapper and a great sort of business founder and molder. And yes, we do not hear from them as much. And do you think that's because have people expressed that's because they're scared of speaking out positively about him?
People are scared. And I think also people are worried that they don't want to kind of come in and accuse people of being, money grabbers or having false allegations. So I think they've been finding it difficult to reconcile what they've been hearing with the man that they knew and sort of piecing those two bits together. A lot of people are worried that he might not have a fair trial just because there have been so many lawsuits and so many allegations out there about him. And they're worried about what that means. And even Daniel Evans, for instance, he was skeptical about some of the initial allegations, didn't want to believe it. Yes, he believed that Puffy had a temper or Sean Combs had a temper. Yes, he'd seen him make violent threats. But he said to me, it wasn't until he saw that video of Cassie back in 2016 in that hotel in LA being brutally beaten by Sean Combs that he sort of sat there and thought, my God, that's really hard to watch. That's really hard to see. But I think what I found most interesting as well is there was this really great quote from a guy called Jimmy Maines, who worked with Sean Combs back at Uptown Records in the early 90s, was one of his colleagues. And he also grew up with Combs as well in Mount Vernon, New York. And he said to me something that feels really fitting. He was like, one could see Sean Combs as a monster. He's like, that's not how I see him. That's not the Puffy that I knew. Or he said, somebody could say, this is what money does to you, and maybe money just gives you the freedom to be who you really are. And he was that guy all along. So it's been quite interesting hearing about how money and power influenced and shaped him in those early days.
Rianna, thank you so much for coming on the pod and sharing your investigation with us. It's going to be up as an article. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's it from this episode of Diddy on Trial from the BBC World Service. Make sure you subscribe to the World Service YouTube channel so you never miss a thing.